My name is Cheryl, and I want to tell you my scary story. I have lived in the countryside since I was a child. I'm from an area where there are many old historic houses. Many of my friends boasted about the age of their possessions, but I could boast of something much more special. There is an old tile factory in my yard that belongs to my family. To be more specific, there are several buildings that make up this old tile factory. They stretched across both sides of the entrance to the yard, and although they aroused admiration among my friends, they could be terrifying at night. Often, when I came home late, I would run across the yard so as not to look at the broken windows and dark entrances. This story happened one winter afternoon when I was walking home from school. There was only one bus every hour from my village, so when I finished school, after 8 lessons, especially in winter, I would go home right when it got dark outside. That day, I had to cross the yard again. So as always, whenever I crossed the street, I ran quickly toward the house. About halfway there, I looked up and saw that a woman was standing in one of the rooms of the building, the entrance to which was covered with a white sheet. I stopped. At first, I was terrified and felt goosebumps across my body. Who could it be? However, after a while, when the figure left the room, I noticed that it was none other than my aunt. I breathed a sigh of relief. "Hey, Auntie," I said as I waved at her. She gave me a friendly smile and responded, "Hi, how's school going?" But at that moment, I began to feel that something was wrong. Why didn't she have a flashlight with her? It was dark. I looked at her closely and noticed that she was very pale and her smile seemed forced. "Everything's fine," I replied. Auntie smiled even wider, which suddenly scared me. I held back a shiver. Suddenly, an idea popped into my head. "Which bus did you take home from work today?" I asked her. There was only one bus that came to our village, and it was the one I took home from school. Her answer told me everything I needed to know. "There was a lot of traffic today, and I didn't want to wait, so I took a different bus," she said. I didn't even look at her face. I immediately ran towards the house, not waiting for a reaction. As I said, there was only one bus to my village, so my aunt couldn't have taken another bus. Also, I only realized it once I got inside my house, but my aunt was working until 8 p.m. that day, and it was only 5 p.m. When I told my family about what happened, there was a lot of confusion. Grandma called my aunt, and Grandpa and Dad went out to search the yard. Fortunately, the strange being, or whatever it was no longer there. After this incident, for several weeks, my parents gave me a lift to school by car, and I never entered any of the old buildings again. To this day, I wonder what that creature was, and why it took on the appearance of my aunt. Hey, Wansi, this is a story that my mum's grandfather told her, and now I want to share it with you. I am a guy from India. You can call me Mark. To give a little context, this event happened way back in 1966, when my mum's grandfather worked in the Indian Army as a quartermaster. He was a very strong man, and there was almost nothing that could scare him. It was a frigid winter night in 1966. He was posted in an area called Ladakh, and the temperature there reached below the freezing point several times. That night, he was doing his patrolling duty in the area around the camp. This was when people used to ride horses, so he was patrolling on his horse. While he was out, he saw a strange tent in the distance. He was not alone though, as there were a few officers patrolling along with him. They went together to check out the tent, and what he saw sent a chill down his spine. He saw several disfigured people dancing at what seemed to be a party. Otherworldly music was being played, and to this surprise, none of the people were wearing winter clothing. On that chilly winter night, which was next to impossible to bear, they were fine without any warmth. The next thing he noticed was that many of the people's feet were twisted around backwards. He didn't need to see anything else to know who these people were. As soon they saw him and his fellow officers, they shouted, "Hey, look, we have some government officers as guests." They then invited them to the party. Though the officers were hesitant, they accepted the offer. The strange people offered to serve them food, but the army officers requested for them to put the food in a bag for later, as they were already full. They went home with those bags, and when they opened them, found strange meats, including some human parts and some unusual bones. The following night, the officers returned to the same place while patrolling, but there were no signs to be found of the people or the tent. It had all disappeared, as though nothing had even happened. Hi, my name is Maria. This is a true story that happened to me. I am 15 years old, and I live in the Philippines. Just to let you know, I am currently in my 3rd year of junior high school, which in the Philippines is the 9th grade. Our class starts at 12 noon and ends around 6:45 or 7 in the evening. In our country, there is a vehicle we call a tricycle. It is a 3-wheeled vehicle made with a motorcycle and a sidecar. I usually go home with one of my classmates, but one day she was sick and didn't attend our class. Anyways, our class ended late that night, and we all got out from school around 7:10 at night. I was waiting for a tricycle for about 10 minutes, but unfortunately, there weren't any at that time. I got frustrated and decided to walk home, even though our house is far from our school. I was walking for about 5 minutes when a tricycle stopped in front of me. I was relieved, thinking maybe I wouldn't have to walk home, but quickly got scared when I saw the driver. He was kind of handsome. He looked like he was 19 or 20 years old and had black hair. I know you're all wondering why I was scared. And the reason is, he was smiling from ear to ear while staring at me. I was asking myself whether or not I should get into the tricycle or not, but got in after thinking about how late it already was and how far from home I still was. I told the driver my address, and he started driving. I was very nervous, so I got my phone out of my pocket and texted my parents the plate number of the tricycle. "How old are you, miss?" said the driver, breaking the silence. I got goosebumps hearing his voice. It was deep and creeped me out. I awkwardly told him I was 15. "You're in 9th grade, am I correct?" he asked. Yes, sir," I answered. He was asking me personal questions like, what are my hobbies? What time do I go home from school? And do I usually go home this late? He was busy talking to me when he saw an old lady on the side of the street, waiting for a tricycle. He stopped the vehicle right in front of the old lady, and the old lady got into the tricycle. The lady told him her address, and the man started driving again. The old lady was busy looking for her money in her big purse when she suddenly stopped and looked at me. She whispered and told me that her house was not far from here, and she suggested that I stay with her since she noticed that there is something off with this man. As soon as the tricycle stopped at the front of her house, we quickly got out of the vehicle and paid the driver. We entered her house, and I called my parents to pick me up. I told them what happened, and they quickly thanked the old lady. Ever since that incident happened, my dad has been picking me up from school every night. Months later, my family and I were watching TV when I saw the driver in the news. The news stated that he was a wanted criminal who had killed many girls who had finally been arrested after 2 years. The news also mentioned that he killed girls who were 17 to 20 years old. I was shocked and terrified, remembering how I felt there was something off about him. I was lucky I wasn't one of the girls he killed, and I am very thankful for the older lady who saved me from that man. Until now, I still wonder what would have happened to me if that lady hadn't saved me from that guy. It was 2019, and I was around 10 years old when this happened. I live in the southeast of England, and unfortunately, this is where a lot of criminals get sent after being let out of prison. This made me feel scared and worried about what might happen to me, and when I was a young girl, I often had strangers approach me. Nevertheless, our community was tight-knit, and everyone knew everyone. I lived on the main road and within a 10-minute walk from my aunts, uncles, and grandparents. The story begins on a day during the summer holidays, and I had spent all day out with my friends. My mum called me at around 6 to tell me that dinner was ready, and before I came in, she asked if I could drop off some birthday cards round my nan's house. Of course I said yes. My friends lived that way, and so it meant I could be out with them a little longer. We walked down the main road and said our goodbyes, and I trailed off to my nan's. Once I arrived there, I spoke to my nan for a while and then hurried off home. I was quite independent for my age, so I didn't feel the need to call my mum on the way home. As I was walking, I felt a buzz in my pocket. My mum was just calling as I was gone a little longer than she had anticipated, and she was beginning to get worried. I reassured her that everything was fine and that she could go on prepping the table. She said she would rather stay on the phone with me and that it's no problem. I was nearly home, about 5 minutes left to walk, when a man approached me on a bike. He was fat and ginger, with grubby clothes and an awful smile. He slowed down as he got closer to me and said in the most awful voice, "Hey kid, do you want to go to the beach with me?" My heart dropped. I froze, not knowing what to say. My mum must have heard the voice down the phone and began to shout loud enough for him to hear, "Hey, who are you?" He must have heard her as he quickly biked off. My dad came to meet me and walk me the rest of the way home, and obviously, all my family was informed of what happened. My granddad said he knew him and that he seemed harmless and was probably just trying to be friendly. A couple of years later, we all sat down for a family meeting. The same guy had just been charged for the murder of a young girl. I instantly felt sick and dizzy, and I had to sit down. What if that were me? I cannot imagine what would have happened if my mum hadn't called me that day and startled him off. In the summer of 2021, my kids and I went on a road trip to visit my sister, who lives in a different state. I was driving the car while my children were playing with their toys in the back of the car. After around 3 hours, my children went to sleep, and I started feeling like I really needed to pee. It was a hot day, and I had to stay hydrated, but that obviously meant a lot of bathroom stops. After driving for what felt like another hour with no rest stops in sight, I drove down a road into a nearby forest. Just to be clear, I'm a woman, and I don't mind relieving myself in nature, especially when I really have to go. After all, that is how nature intended people to do their business. I parked the car near the road and locked it. Before you judge me, I just want to clarify that I left the car windows slightly open so my children would have access to fresh air, but they weren't open wide enough for anyone to stick their hand or even their finger inside. I didn't go far into the woods. I wanted to have my car in sight all the time. After making sure nobody was around, I squatted down and relieved myself. When I finished, I went back to my car. Before driving off, I turned around to check on my children and almost screamed after seeing that thing. On the back seat, inches away from my children, was a giant gross red beetle. It was the size of a TV remote, way too thick to crawl through the small gap in the window, and it was crawling all over the car, leaving a black, tar-like substance everywhere. I grabbed a tissue and quickly grabbed the beetle. I could feel its legs moving through the tissue. I threw it out of the car and drove away immediately. Fortunately, my children were still sleeping, and the beetle didn't crawl onto them. When we arrived at my sister's house, I used a sponge to get rid of the tar-like substance from the seats and tried to forget about what happened. I didn't tell anyone about it. After a week, it was time to drive home. While driving by the forest again, I remembered about the beetle, but thank goodness we didn't encounter it again. To this day, I'm still wondering how it got into the car. I just had to get this story off my chest. Every time I see a beetle, I think of this strange encounter. Who knows how many of these giant beetles there are, and who knows what they use that black substance for?